Hello everyone, in this video I want to talk about the troubleshooting and recovery of the system. This is a 2013 Mac Pro. It was working inside of a studio here in Milan, Italy. And this is the original hard drive SSD. That is a 1 terabyte SSD from 2013. That was super expensive back then. But on the contrary, on the other side, they decided to go with one of the lower end options for the CPU, which for audio is actually a very good choice, the 6-core option. It's a perfect balance of cores and speed and frequency. 64 gigabyte, that's 4-channel DDR3. It's still pretty powerful this day, and it has two AMD FirePro D500 GPUs. That was a terrible, awful implementation from Apple, and they didn't even support it themselves. They were like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna give them 2 GPUs, and then they're gonna figure out how to use it." And I guess really there were no use for this outside of maybe DaVinci Resolve and Final Cut, but that's another story. So what happened here is that the system was experiencing some random slowdowns in December, and then the slowdowns became more and more frequent. Up to one point, the system was not booting anymore. I did manage to correct remotely to the machine at some point, and I couldn't pinpoint any problem with that. So I was already thinking about the SSD, because that's really the only part that has kind of a slowdown behavior during time, passing time. It might have been memory, but this is ACC memory correction error memory, and it would result in a crash. So I was already thinking about the SSD, and at some point the system stopped rebooting, but the SSD was not dead. Usually SSD die a very sudden death with no recovery option, but here we are actually just getting Apple, the Apple logo, loading screen, and the system would just refuse to complete booting. Safe boot wouldn't work, but I booted from an external SSD running Monterey, and the system was perfectly readable. Like the SSD was readable, all the files we were able to save all the files. And then we had to decide whether to go with a new system, like a fresh install, or try to salvage the working system. And just to be 100% honest with you, I usually prefer just to go with the new system. It's both a question of like it works better for for me to work with that. Like it's usually easier to do that, to just install a fresh system and start from scratch. And I think people should really actually try to renovate, like regenerate themselves. I don't know how to say that in English. Sorry. Like start from fresh is good. That's my opinion. And this machine probably was accumulating a lot of old config files from the older version of macOS that were running here. I don't know if it was ever actually fresh installed in the past, but my guess was not, because of the huge amount of leftover files all around the system. And yeah, on the other side, there was a problem that this system is running a very old version of Pro Tools, 2020, and Pro Tools is a very conservative software in its nature. So the 2020 version of Pro Tools is only compatible up to Catalina, and these people really like to have a working stable system where everything is certified to be working. So yeah, upgrading to newer version Pro Tools would be a lot of money, and the guys really didn't seem to need that. Actually, the system was running Mojave on the original SSD. I switched to Catalina because I didn't have the Mojave installer around, and I just wanted to go with the highest possible OS for that Pro Tools version. And that was kind of a mistake maybe, and we'll get to now why is that. So my first try was get a new SSD. I bought a P3 Plus, which I checked on the internet. It was reported to be compatible with the Mac Pro, and it was just cheap. Like for audio production, you don't need a fast drive, you don't need anything like that. That was very cheap and available. And I proceeded to install a fresh copy of Catalina on that, and then do the migration assistant and migrate the old SSDs, the old system, to the new drive. So the old user account, application, and settings. But I tried that 3 times, and it always resulted in a non-bootable system. Like the machine was just stuck at like completing migration or something like that, and it would not be recoverable. I didn't even like overwrite the user that I made on the system, so I always like installed from fresh Catalina with a new admin user, administrator called admin, and then I would import the other user from the original system from this drive alongside the admin user, so that I had like a recovery option. And the third time that this all failed, I decided to boot the system with Monterey just to check out the files inside, and the drive was empty. Like after 6 hours of migration, the system would reboot and say that it was completing the migration, and it was actually empty. So it was not working. Nothing was happening there. So I decided to try a second approach, which in a retrospective, it's much more clever, is to just clone this drive, because this drive was hosting Mojave, and then do an in-place install of Catalina on the cloned drive, sorry, of course, on this drive then. And that worked. That worked perfectly fine. And my idea is that worked because in the first way of doing that, like by migration, you're actually overwriting the new files, the new configuration files of Catalina with older Mojave configuration files, and that doesn't work for sure. Didn't work at all, and that makes sense because the new binaries are reading old configuration files and they're not working. They're just not compatible. But by doing the opposite, like installing in place Catalina on the Mojave install, you're actually replacing system files from Catalina on the Mojave install. So the new like default settings that are needed to boot the systems are all new from Catalina install, and they're all compatible with their respective binaries. So that worked, and that's how we got to this stable, like working system, booting system. But there was another catch here. Actually, the SSD inside is another SSD, because I put the P3 Plus inside of the system, and the MacPro just didn't see it. So what I tried to do then was to get another SSD, original Apple SSD, confirmed to be working, and I installed Monterey on it in a way that would allow the boot ROM to be upgraded to the latest version. And this worked, like the update worked, sorry. I was able to get which is the latest boot ROM for the system, which supposedly correct a couple of like bugs with the firmware and compatibility with Monterey and everything, which is not needed here, but might be in the future. But the system was still not recognized, like the machine was not recognizing the P3 Plus. And the funny thing is that everyone I didn't find anyone having the same problem. So I tried to boot a P3, normal P3 that I was having. I had inside another system around the lab here, just to check, and this was not recognized either. I tried to read an SN530. That's an OEM drive from a Dell system, and that was recognized properly, so that worked. Then I tried, this one is a this is a 2210 Micron SSD, some kind of a OEM Micron SSD, which is very similar, like almost the same as this, which is a P1. And the Micron 2210 was not recognized, while the P1 was. But this P1 is not available for use, so I ended up buying an SN730, and because that's the same exact drive that I'm using for my personal Hackintosh, and it's been working very fine with the macOS, and that drive was recognized, so that's how I set it up. The drive installed in the system that is working now. Yeah, so that was like a kind of a long experience. I had to just then clone the working Catalina installed from here to the SSD inside of the MacPro, and yeah, that resulted in a working system. I will now proceed to apply some thermal pads and heat spreaders on the SSD to prevent future problem with the overheating here, and I already did that on the GPU before. And that is all for the video, guys. Ciao!